saints and sinners in Kashmir. We bring you a viewpoint from a specialist on peace and security in South Asia and who has been a government-appointed interlocutor for Jammu and Kashmir, Radha Kumar. She is a historian and policy analyst who has authored several acclaimed books on ethnic conflict and feminism. Her book, Paradise at War, Political History of Kashmir, analyzes failures and missed opportunities in Kashmir conundrum and calls for a collective effort from all stakeholders to arrive at a sustainable solution. Joining in the discussion is Tavleen Singh, well-known and vocal media personality, author and journalist. She received the Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Woman Media Person. I also call on Tuhin Sinha, best-selling author and politician and at present a spokesperson for the BJP. And please join us in this discussion. I invite the retired General of the Indian Army, Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, to moderate this session. Among his appointments, he commanded an army corps in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir and is applauded for his efforts in bringing the army closer to the people during his tenure. He is also a well-known and distinguished speaker and political analyst on defense-related issues. Please come on the stage, General and Radha Kumarji, please आइए. Tavleen Singh, Tuhin Sinha, please come on the stage. Thank you. This discussion is based on Radha Kumar's book, Paradise at War, Political History of Kashmir.
माइक है अभी पर एक ही पड़ा और
Good morning and Jai Hind. Good morning and Jai Hind. Great. I know that most of the warriors are perhaps sitting at the back. They recognize the Jai Hind very well. Let me start by firstly expressing my gratitude. A great festival. It's come to become an iconic landmark in the history of Indian literary festivals. My fourth year here running. Can you hear me at the back? Clearly? Okay. My fourth year running here. One of the best audiences that you can ever get. Intellectual to the hilt. I don't know whether you're liberal, I don't know whether you're radical, I don't know whether you're nationalist, ultra-nationalist, patriotic or what. I can describe myself. I am an ultra-nationalist. I'm an Indian Army warrior. I'm a thorough liberal. I can assure you this, that all this you can combine into one. And you need not argue with Sagrika on this issue at all. We had just gone by. Must compliment her for that. Now on to the subject which everyone knows everything about, and that's Kashmir. But it's not about the currency of the situation in Kashmir. It's not about the various issues concerning it. It's not about Pakistan, etc. It's about this book. It's about this book. Paradise at War. It's a huge book. It's a big book. It's making its own place in the history, in the literature, world of literature, and it's been written by a very well-known personality, Ms. Radha Kumar, who's here with us. All of 350 pages, 21 chapters, and what's important in this is that 2/3 of this book is actually focused on the post-1989 situation. It's a book of great detail. And the earlier part from 1846 to 1947 is given much lesser focus, although it is there. But from 89 onwards, it's almost event to event that you can all identify with, because it's all happened in your time. So I think this is going to be a very interesting take on this book. She's an author, historian, a political analyst. She's authored couple of books, many books in fact, on ethnic conflict, on feminism, and was one of the interlocutors, as all of you would remember, one of the interlocutors appointed in 2010-11. He submitted a very, very well-known report to the government of India, which somehow we never saw the light of day. She also headed the Delhi Policy Group and was deeply involved as a knowledgeable consultant, a very knowledgeable consultant on the issues related to Afghanistan. And I've personally worked with her and I know how deep her knowledge on Afghanistan is. We are fortunate to have with us as a panelist, Ms. Tavleen Singh. No introductions required. There's no need to introduce you, ma'am. Most know her today, most know her from yesterday. And I would always identify her with her outstanding column which she writes every week in the Indian Express. The last week's column was so outstanding that I was constrained at 6:30 in the morning to tweet it out and also send her a message of compliments. Thank you for the response I got from you. So we will have her as one of the panelists, and our third panelist again needs little introduction. Screenplay writer, author, political blogger, and an activist. Tuhin Sinha is an active member of the Bharatiya Janata Party since January 2014. He has written 6 books, rather young in years to have written 6 books. And he's a blogger. And also his first book was actually, the most popular of them, was a book called The Edge of Desire. So we've got 55 minutes. The breakdown is typically military. The breakdown is, I've already taken up 3.5 minutes. You can extend to 5. We've got 15 minutes for the author to explain to us her various aspects of her book, which I will outline for you as to what particularly we are asking for. 25 minutes for our panelists, which will essentially be a question and answer session. And then I'll give them a little time to express their own views at random. That should leave us about 10 minutes, I hope, at the end. Perhaps at a pinch 15 for a question and answer session with the audience. We'll take a bouquet of questions, in fact 2 bouquets of questions of 3 each, and that should, I think, meet the requirement and satiate everyone's desires before lunch. So it's over to you, Radha, and you can speak from wherever you like, but my request to you, please share the findings of your immense research, which is so evident in this book. The challenges that you faced in researching and writing it, because frankly saying, the kind of material which you've got in this book, I don't know how you could get it. It is so much of it in such great detail. It would be nice to share with us how you could go into so much of detail. Whether your findings point towards an increasingly gloomy future for Jammu and Kashmir, or whether you sense a sense of a glimmer of hope somewhere on the horizon that things are on the mend. And lastly, does anything from your research and your experience as one of the most important interlocutors give you an inkling that there will be a change of mindsets about Kashmir and in Kashmir any time in the near future? I hope you will keep these 3 aspects in mind. 15 minutes for you.
Well, thank you, Atta, for that very generous introduction. Of course, you omitted to mention that this book is in 10-point font, which makes it a labor of love to read. Before I begin to talk about the book, I would just like to share with you my sense of horror and foreboding, which has grown over the past 2 months after August 5th and the President's orders, which basically hollowed out Article 370 so that nothing is left of it, which sent thousands of additional troops to the valley, under which internet and all forms of communication to people in the valley have been cut and remain cut for 2 long months, and possibly we do not know how much longer. I begin this book with a sentence saying that this book was a labor of pain as much as of love. But this book was completed last year, much, much before the events that we have now recently seen. And I can only say that that pain has turned to anguish and despair. I'm constantly traumatized by the thought that almost 7 million people of India have been silenced and have been forcibly silenced, and that we should be able to tolerate such a situation in our country. It's difficult for me to even speak without bursting into tears. That wasn't the country I was born in. That wasn't the philosophy I grew up with. That wasn't the endeavor that so many of us have spent our lives fighting for. When I read the constitutional debates of our founding fathers, I am again moved to tears every single time. The hopes, the ideals, the sense of worth of every person in our country, the idea that every tear could be wiped from every eye, all gone. We are imposing tears upon our people. How can we do it? I don't understand. I simply am lost. I'm lost in this situation, and I'm grateful to the organizers of the Khushwant Singh Literary Festival for giving me the opportunity to discuss my own pain and my own sense of the acuteness of suffering in one part of our country. I don't know how many literary festivals recently have had sessions on Kashmir, and I think it's wonderful that you have done that over here. And I also think that's very much in Khushwant's spirit. Sagarika talked about his iconoclasms. I think even more than that, Khushwant was someone who did believe that you must stand up. Sometimes we agreed on what to stand up for, sometimes we didn't agree on what to stand up for. But my admiration for his courage, his personal intellectual courage remains undiminished. I wish he were here today so that I could talk to him about this. Now, this book was perhaps the most difficult book for me to write. I wrote it over a year and a half. Atta, you asked about the research. Actually, it was surprisingly easy. Of course, I love books, so I bought about 150 books on Kashmir. There are several thousands available. I found, to my astonishment, that a whole range of literature on Kashmir was available on the internet. And by the way, most of it was put up by Kashmiri Pandits, who have long been the historians and the archivists and recorders of all things Kashmiri. But I even found the Nilamata Purana, 6th century Purana written about Kashmir on the net. And I learned a great deal just from reading the kinds of literature that Kashmiri Pandits had put up on the net. So, first of all, a huge, huge, grateful thank you on that. Trying to do an overview of something as complex and as detailed and as historically recorded, prolifically recorded as Kashmir is quite a challenging and daunting task, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of criticism of omissions in this book. As Atta has pointed out, I try to summarize the early history and the cultural approaches of the people of Jammu and Kashmir to Jammu first, Kashmir first. Less, of course, is known about Ladakh, so it was more difficult, perhaps, to do much detail there. Here in this book, I've tried to deal with not only Jammu and Kashmir, but also Pakistan-controlled parts of the former princely state, which are divided into two areas, one which was called the northern areas and the other which was called quote-unquote Azad Kashmir. Literature on that I found not so easy to access, so you'll see if you look at this book that there's less on that subject. Now, what were the findings of this book? Well, first and foremost, that right from the time of partition onwards, there were peacemaking efforts between India and Pakistan. Those efforts tended to be rather sporadic. They tended to be short-lived. Generally, they were halted either by external or internal conditions, and certainly the role of the Pakistani army in disrupting peacemaking efforts has been fairly consistent and constant over the last 70 years. That does not mean that we did not make our own mistakes. Unfortunately, at many points, extraneous political conditions or considerations made our leadership also fearful of pushing ahead with what could be possible settlements for Jammu and Kashmir. You can say that we began with the cardinal sin of not allowing the democratically elected government of Jammu and Kashmir to find its feet. I tend, as a historian, to perhaps err on the side of understanding of political compulsions. I do feel that that was a period of huge seismic change and difficulty for India. We should not ever forget the role that the British played at the UN, for example, on making it virtually impossible for us to find a solution through the UN. We should not forget that we were born, we were divided, Jammu and Kashmir was born as a political entity, as a political state, and divided at the same time, all in the context, of course, of the division of the world as well into the Cold War blocs. And we tend not to recognize how much these divisions tended to interconnect and play upon each other and shrink the political spaces for accommodation, for reconciliation, and for resolution. We do know from the history of partitions that hostilities don't go away with partition. In fact, they tend to become institutionalized over a period of time and recur, constantly recur, until eventually either the partition is undone, as it was in the case of Germany, or it is superseded by larger entities of cooperation, as, say, the European Union has done. We were not able, for various reasons, to manage either of those transitions, and it doesn't look like we will. Now, to go away from more academic discussions to immediate humanitarian discussions, 3 or 4 things need to always remain uppermost in our minds when we talk about Jammu and Kashmir. One is that this state went from centuries of imperial rule straight into conflict in 1948 and has been the site of conflict and war every 20 or 30 years. As a result, it has been very difficult for it to develop even the fragile democratic institutions that we managed to develop in the rest of India. And therefore, the civic ability perhaps to resist has been much weakened over there, or much weaker than perhaps in other parts of our country. The other thing that we must remember is that this state, because of constant security conditions, has always had to tackle or struggle with security imperatives that again are often extraneous and not internal, and therefore there has always been a tension between security imperatives on one side and humanitarian and democratic instincts and development on the other side. For the last 30 years, there has been ongoing conflict in this state. It has tended to be not a classical, clear war, but civil and ethnic, and of course cross-border in its dimensions. And what that has done naturally is that it has shattered. It has shattered what one would call normal ways of living. It has restricted the abilities to flourish and to develop. It has, worst of all, it has pitted Kashmiris against Kashmiris over the past period. You may say then, what is so different now? Why do I say I am anguished today? I'm anguished today because even those little glimmers of hope, of somehow the restoration of peace have disappeared entirely. I can see, as a result of what has been done on August 5th, I see only anger, hatred, and the revival of armed conflict of a nature that I shudder to think of. The 90s were terrible for Jammu and Kashmir as they were for us. We too suffered terrorist attacks, for example, as a result of that burgeoning conflict. What may come, I don't know. You asked me, is there a glimmer of hope? The only hope there would be, if this government were to roll back everything they have done on August the 5th, if they were to apologize to the Kashmiris for treating them with contempt and for humiliating them in the deepest, most profound possible way, then maybe we could have a peace process, maybe we could work towards reconciliation. But frankly, whether this government does it or not, I can't see a situation in the near future in which the people of the Valley of Kashmir will forgive us.
Hello. Thank you, Radha. Frank, as was expected, absolutely, and you've summarized your book beautifully. I'll try and keep this discussion contextual, both to the situation and to the book. But when I was reading this book, started from the jacket itself, and I will try and make this discussion very provocative. While reading from the jacket itself and then delving deeper into it, I came across the reference very often here to the term guerrilla. To the extent that even Burhan Wani on the jacket is referred to as a suspected terrorist. This is a very largely military audience. And I remember the year 1999 when the government of India decided that they would term anyone who had taken up arms against India as a terrorist. And I remember, it is in my psyche, we have always in the armed forces been calling anyone who takes up arms against the government and involves themselves in acts which have not been described even by the United Nations so far, but involves themselves in acts such as Pulwama or whatever, as terrorists. So why did you decide to mention guerrilla throughout the book?
I use the term guerrilla in its classic sense of guerrilla conflict. Small militias that get together, that do raids, that blow up bridges or sites, as distinct from conventional armies and formations. So it is not for me a value-laden term at all. And actually, I don't buy this this business of constantly shouting, you can only call it terrorism, or you can only say Pakistan occupied Kashmir. It seems to me to impose just one category on something that needs to be interrogated much more thoroughly and carefully. And intellectually speaking, well, I'm grateful actually that the previous session went into all of this and that Sagarika laid the terms very clearly. I do feel that intellectually, the more we can give dynamism to concepts rather than to freeze them, which I believe deadens them, that is a better thing. Now, there is one thing I did want to say, but if you'd like me to do it later, I can.
I'll only add another context to it, that the term terrorist or guerrilla or insurgent or militant has not been defined even by the United Nations so far. But when we speak contextually here about a proxy war, a proxy hybrid war, emanating from our neighbor on the other side, we tend to generally take this as all that is happening, the violence, as acts of terrorism. Tavleen Singh, would you like to just make a brief comment on this so that we can go on to other parts of our discussion?
On the word guerrilla?
On this aspect of terrorism versus militancy versus guerrilla warfare.
All right. For me, when, what's his name, Burhan Wani says that he wants to impose Shariat in Kashmir and turn it into a caliphate, that to me is not just the voice of a terrorist, but of a traitor. And frankly, I do not believe that India can afford to have a little caliphate within its borders. And he has made it absolutely clear that that is what he wanted to do. Who was the man who followed him? He said the same. So when we speak very gently about guerrillas, you know, what would you call the guys who came to Bombay and started shooting up, you know, ordinary people? Were they just guerrillas? No. Pakistan is fighting a war. So, you know, it's very sweet to be liberal. And believe me, I have been weeping for Kashmir much longer than you. When I went in 1982, and I noticed that there was only one Muslim reporter in the whole valley of Kashmir, I was appalled. And I wrote a book saying that it was a tragedy of errors, mistakes made by us that have created this. But what it's turned into is war.
Tuhin, would you like to chip in here very, very briefly?
General Sahab, it's audible, right? First of all, I am not anguished today. I was extremely anguished between January 1990 and 5th August this year. But today I'm feeling a little more reassured. Finally, a decision has been taken a roadmap is there to ensure all this. Two points which I want to make over here.
That is the power of liberalism here. On this panel here, you've got two completely opposite views which are being expressed.
So there are 2 points which I wish to make over here. And because I also have written a book on Kashmir.
A little closer.
After studying.
Just keep this a little closer.
I didn't study book. So we need to remember that Shaivism preceded Sufism, Sufism preceded Sunnism, and what we had begun to see now in the valley was a form of Wahhabism, which would have, you know, led to the destruction of not just Kashmir, but the entire country.
I'll bring you to that. I'll bring you to that shortly. Let me delve into something a little more political. Radha, I'll request you first to take this. In 1994, particularly, all political parties in India came together, consensus, 22nd of February, and they all, you know, the Congress led initiation, were supported by the BJP. This was the idea of the inviolability of the Jammu and Kashmir territories. This was the famous declaration by the Parliament, which meant that all territories of Jammu and Kashmir belonged to the Union of India, and that India would aspire to get all these territories back. Then thereafter, you found, and you've extensively covered this in your book, you found the 4-point formula coming into being in 2003, pursued in 2004 onwards till 2008. Now, don't you think this was a bit of a paradox that on one hand, all parties had come together in 1994 and talked about the inviolability of the borders? They said every piece of ground in Jammu and Kashmir belongs to India. And thereafter, from 2003 till 2008, we were compromising on this through back-channel diplomacy with Pakistan on the 4-point formula. Could you explain this paradox?
Well, before I do that, I do want to respond I think we have to have some clarity over here. I know that neither of you have had the time, perhaps, to go through this book because you.
One second,
All right.
I'm in charge of this discussion. I'm in charge of this discussion, and military ethos always demands that the man in charge remains in charge, right? So you have to respond to my question, ma'am. I will come to this context. I will come to the context of radicalism and religion very intently in a short while.
To the accusations that have been made that I do not use the term terrorism sufficiently in this book and on Mumbai. If you look at the Mumbai description, it is very clear I use the term terrorism throughout. So that is just, okay, you know, I don't understand how you want me to do anything. Now, to move on to your question, which is the Indian claim to the entire former princely state. There is no doubt that the instrument of accession, at the point of the instrument of accession, though the Maharaja was not physically in control of the territory of the entire princely state, he was legally still the ruler, and he made an agreement to accede to India, and therefore, legally speaking, that entire territory should be part of the Indian Union. You may perhaps, as a military man, have a better explanation for why it is that India has never sought to militarily conquer that territory. I hear members of our government today talking about militarily conquering that territory. I'm afraid I'm extremely skeptical. I don't think that we have the military capabilities to conquer it at present. Perhaps you can build it up. Perhaps this will be built up. Perhaps later in the day you will be in a position to do it. Now, when it comes to the question of peacemaking, number one, we seem in our country to think we make peace only with our friends. We do not. You make peace with your enemies, not your friends. When you make peace with your enemies, you are never going to gain every single one of the things you want. You will gain some and you will give some. That's the essence of peacemaking. So this is up to you to decide. I deeply believe in peacemaking. I also deeply believe that in a democracy, the concerned people must be on board anything you want to do. And everything I've ever heard from Kashmir is that they want a peaceful resolution. The CBN of trade and travel across the line of control was perhaps one of the most popular CBMs ever in the history of this conflict, because it meant that whether legally or not, whether militarily or not, in some way or another, Kashmiris were going to interact with each other after a very long time.
Thank you. The issue about Pakistan occupied Kashmir and the recapture militarily will be addressed by me in the last 30 seconds of this discussion, right? But let me come to Tuhin first, and then come back to Tavleen. On this issue itself, on 1994, the resolution, and subsequently the pursuance or the pursuit of peace through the 4-point formula. After 2004, we didn't hear anything from the BJP ever as an objection to what was being done from 2003 till 2008. The initiation almost came at the time of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Do you have anything to say on this? That on one hand, the BJP was talking about the issue of Article 370 and the inviolability of the entire borders and the territories of Jammu and Kashmir, and on the other hand, was not objecting to anything which the Congress was doing from 2004 to 2008.
Well, you know, to have come to the stage where Article 370 could be abrogated with the kind of, effectiveness that it has been done today, I think in different situations, the situation is not right for certain things. Besides, there was a different leadership in the BJP. Our commitments remain the same, but can I just answer the other point about the 2 months of communication and
That we'll come to. We'll come to it.
because that's something that I need to make a point of that. Can I just remind? Okay.
Let me come to that. I've got a question for Tavleen meanwhile. You started off in your earlier intervention on this issue of Wahhabiyat and things like that. Now in Radha, in her book also, particularly in the chapter where you come to 2010 and the agitation, which you were very deeply involved in the sense you're studying it itself as an interlocutor later, you speak about Islam, the idea in Kashmir that Islam was in danger. Islam khatre mein hai. You mentioned this actually in the book at a stage. How much do you think is the idea of radicalism, Islamic radicalism, extremism, violent extremism, whatever you want to call it, how much do you think this drives the whole conflict in Kashmir? How much has it helped Pakistan to connect with the people, and why do you think we in India have never been able to counter it?
Me? Yeah. Okay. I actually saw it start. It was in 1990 when suddenly these gangs, actually Farooq Abdullah, poor man, said when he was ousted, he said the Jamaat-e-Islami is up to no good, and if they don't let me come back politically, I will not be able to control the situation. All right, but by 1990, there were gangs of thugs who were out there breaking down liquor shops, closing down video things, changing the whole nature of Kashmir. Women had acid thrown on their faces if they didn't have niqabs on. I've seen women, when I started to cover Kashmir, praying in mosques. It's the only time anywhere in the world that I have seen that. The ordinary Kashmiri woman didn't wear a hijab. So this change has been forced by Pakistan, and it's, I think a lot of other money from Saudi Arabia has come in. The whole nature of Islam was made to change, and that's why the pundits were made to leave.
Tuhin, would you like to comment on, take it on from there to say, why, what is the understanding of radicalism within the BJP leadership or within the party itself,
Well,
and how do you think this can be countered?
Our stand is very clear. Gajwa-e-Hind is a reality. You may hate the term. Love jihad is a reality. Now it may exist by different names, different
No love
forms.
jihad rubbish here.
Okay.
So anyway, coming to the point over here, fact is, there were two big obstacles in the path of any solution which could have been attempted in Kashmir. One was the obsession of Kashmir's local leadership with Pakistan, the mutual obsession. And the two was the growing, presence of caliphate fanboys who were making it difficult for the normal citizens to lead a, normal life. And over a period of time, now we have explored every possible alternative, but things had reached a pass where it was a critical life-saving operation. If we had not done it now, and the post-operative care, mind you, has
let me get you clear. By doing this, how are you countering radicalism?
Well, the roadmap.
My understanding of hybrid conflict shows me, constitutionally, by abrogating 370, how are you countering radicalism?
The very fact is that Article 370 exists in other states also, but the local leadership over here, and a lot of the culpability lies with the local leadership, and that's why I wanted to give you an example from 1946. In 1946 September, barely 5 weeks before the tribal armies from Pakistan invaded us, there is evidence of the Raja of Kashmir, Karan Singh's father, having sent his prime minister to negotiate India's merger, Kashmir's merger with India. Now Nehru refused it, saying you should first release Sheikh Abdullah. Exactly less than 7 years later, Nehru could see through Sheikh Abdullah. He could see the politics of blackmail, and what happened? The Kashmir conspiracy case where for 11 years, Sheikh Abdullah was externed to a place 2,000 kilometers away from Kashmir into another paradise called Kodaikanal.
That's where Radha lives today.
Great. So, compared to that, I think this operation of 2 months, yes, there has been a communication breakdown in part.
Increase radical Islam.
No,
I think it
all
will.
the
I think Tuhin, I think you can be taken up on that. I think you can be taken up on this issue.
I'm not answering that.
What we need to admit, and let me admit it for you. Just one second. Let me admit it for you. The fact about radicalism, radical Islam, and the amount I have studied radical Islam, I think very few may have done it. We in the Indian Army, for example, or anyone in the security system, how much did we know anything about Islam? Forget radical Islam. Through the 90s and through the millennium, early part of the millennium, while all this was happening under our nose, did we, any one of us know anything about it? I think we just allowed it to happen. And today we are floundering around with the whole issue of how to counter it. Everyone is talking about counter-radicalization. Everyone is talking about de-radicalization, but we really don't have many ideas on how to do it. We'll kill it there. Let me take you up on one more thing, Radha. In the book, the theme in the book which I seem to sense, and obviously it's confirmed from the fact that I know you so well and we've discussed so many times together sitting in the office of the Delhi Policy Group. I always know that you felt that the handling of Jammu and Kashmir was left far too much to the security system, which is what you also spoke about, over-securitization and the approach being from the security domain more than anything else. Do you think, what exactly is your point on this? I want to know, number one, why is your objection that, because I can argue that unless you militarily bring a state, a situation, to a level of stability, conflict progression to conflict stabilization, and from stabilization only can you take on the issue of conflict resolution. Now, if you haven't reached the stage of conflict stabilization itself, how can you blame the system for following a security approach?
No, actually, Atta, I think I've been fairly clear in here, but maybe I haven't. But my view is, in fact, quite the opposite view. I believe that the military has, at many points in time, restored enough calm for the political process to kick in. I actually feel that our political leadership, both past and present, have dreadfully misused our military because they have never stepped in at that moment when it was possible to have the political negotiations to come at some kind of resolution, and therefore the situation has always gone back to a point where the military has to come back again. That is not the way to deal with your military. Secondly, I also feel, and I have said this for at least 20 years, that to send soldiers into harm's way without adequate equipment, without adequate means, is, again, you are exposing them when you do not need to expose them. As far as I'm concerned, Kashmir has been from the beginning a political issue. The question of the relationship between that state and the Indian Union has been allowed to remain too much of a question without political negotiations to settle those elements. I think that the hollowing out of Article 370 was a terrible mistake at each time that it was done. Of course, not on things like customs and fisheries and so on. Those were beneficial economically for Kashmir, and I don't think anyone in Kashmir minded those. But the major political issues that were changed, generally through presidential orders, were a mistake. Now, none of those, however, those were issue by issue. What has been done today is comprehensive. It's everything. And every Kashmiri that I have managed to speak to in the last 2 months have used one word. They have said they have humiliated us. And I think you as a military man know that humiliation can sometimes be the most profound cause of violence and conflict.
Tuhin, what would you have
and
to say?
I would agree with Tavleen. I think that the events of August 5th and the past 2 months have increased our vulnerability exponentially, especially to non-state actors. I fear deeply that we have pushed people back into a kind of radicalization that I was hoping certainly during our period of
if I can just-
interlocution. One last statement. During our 1 year of interlocution, I did feel that actually the kinds of dialogues that we were having and the kinds of steps that we were trying to take, which were quite small, were ones that were beginning to de-escalate the radicalization process in Kashmir.
I'll have a separate question for you, Tavleen. But before that,
Can I just
give
say something
give us
in
2
between?
minutes.
Can I just say something that might cheer you up? The book is excellent. It's the best researched book on Kashmir. Guys, go and buy it right now. And it's like a political history. You may not agree because there's very little opinion. It is a full political history that should be in schools.
Tuhin, I think it was the last intervention to him. I'll give you a chance here to explain this aspect of the so-called lockdown and the so-called communication, thing which has happened, the complete lockdown and communication. But before that, adding this context here to the aspect of the overuse of the military, particularly 2016 to 2018, you've seen after the killing of Burhan Wani, you've had Operation All Out, which has led to a situation of complete stability by the time we came to 2019, awaiting a political initiative. Well, the political initiative, you can say in many ways, came on the 5th of August. What is your perception of the use or the overuse of the military?
Kashmir has always gone through those phases where intense military action has to be succeeded by a political process. But you can't do it in the middle of a situation where if stone throwing is at its peak and people are being killed every day. But yes, I mean, this is the time that the political process has to start and will effectively start. Now, contrary to popular belief, I know of television panelists who have been bad-mouthing the government, who've been appearing on television channels from August end, who are based in Srinagar. Television channels managed to reach out to them, either through telephone. So the perception of the lockdown we are talking about is highly exaggerated. And I can name at least, I can name people. And they would vouch they've been reached out in Srinagar.
The world knows what's happened in Kashmir. Don't lie.
No, I can give you names of people who have been reached out.
Okay, I think.
No, you can't be certifying the truth, right?
But I can. There are no cell phones in Kashmir. The whole world knows what's
No,
happening.
so what I said was that the story is exaggerated. People are reaching out through telephones. The truth is that Kashmir solution is finally there.
Right, I think we'll have to call it a day as far as the discussion is here, and we'd love to have a few questions. I would like someone to, since I've not had the chance to ask this question of the panel, if there's someone who would like to elaborate on an aspect about media. Since Tavleen ji is here, I want her to particularly respond to a question on the handling of Kashmir by the media, the Indian media or the rest of the Indian media and the Kashmiri media. Would anyone like to ask this question? Is Vishnu Shom here? Why don't Vishnu ask this question? Vishnu, since you are an anchor yourself, why don't you ask this question? Okay, let someone ask this question in case. Otherwise, let's have any questions. Yes, the lady who put up her. No, there was the lady there. Then we'll come to you, sir. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon, ma'am. Congratulations for the book. I have yet to read it. But my question is, it's very easy to just say, okay, fine, they. And sometimes you said yourself at the podium that it's a part of India. Kashmir is a part of India. And then now you're saying that Kashmiri says they have, mistreated us, they have humiliated us. So why is it that conveniently Kashmir becomes a part of India and conveniently they want to be separate? So it has to be a part of India for us to actually look, it has to be a win-win situation for both. So this is not a political question, this is a question from a citizen of India. So can you answer that, please?
Okay, can I have one more question? We'll take that question, sir. Then we'll come back to you, sir. We'll come to the left side. We'll come.
No, after August 5, BJP has, present government has gone around the town, okay, now this is over, now the development will start. Now you tell me one thing, the presence of Article 370, how it was an impediment to carry out a progress in the state. Did someone stop you from making up the roads? Did someone stop you from making up the hospitals? But now you're going around the town, okay, now we will start the progress. What was happening earlier, even your own BJP's rule? Who stopped the state of the road is the same as what was 30, 40 years back. You have been there in the valley, I have been there in the valley. Nobody paid any kind of heed to all these things.
Thank you, sir. Sir, yes. So we have on the left side, we'll come back to you in the next bouquet of questions. You will be the first person. That side.
Mike.
So the foreign minister Jaishankar made a statement, and also followed by the defense minister, even to the extent vice president, that one day POK will be under physical jurisdiction of our country. Now in this context, I would like to ask, is it not going to be, this is not going to be repeated of 65? September 65.
Who would you like?
I would like to know this time, if that happens, it means militarily or some other. If it is militarily, do you think Pakistan will not retaliate, or even he has been...
Okay, we got your question, sir. We've got 3 questions here. Who would you like the last question to be answered by? I hope not by me.
Oh, you.
Okay.
Because you have seen the battle won in 65 by the...
Okay, sir, we've got it. We've got the question.
Tiranga started flying there.
Will respond.
Battle won by the military, lost
And
by
as briefly as possible, so that we can have the second bouquet of questions.
All right. The first question on anomaly. Let me just say that they refers to the government of India. It does not refer to the entire population of India. So please don't argue with this. You ask me a question, you get an answer. I deeply, deeply believe that the people of India, as a true liberal, have different voices and they should be free to express all their voices. Now, there is a further point, which is the distinction between accession and merger. Kashmir acceded to India. Unlike the other princely states, it never merged with India. That is why it had its own constitution. That constitution was brought into harmony with the constitution of India. There is nothing in that constitution which violates any part of the constitution of India. Nevertheless, it was very important for them to have it. On Article 370, I agree with what you're saying. I don't believe 370 was an impediment of any sort at all.
Maybe you may have a different point of view.
Finally, on 1965, I think what you were saying was that in 1965 we won a lot of territory, but when it came to international pressure, we gave up some of it. Is that what you're saying? Well, that's a fact.
No, I think I'll ask Tavleen to just clarify, then I'll clarify your questions.
So, I've already mentioned that Article 370 exists in a couple of other states, and that by itself was not the biggest impediment. No, Article 370.
371 exists.
So anyway, my point over here is that the point over here, Article 35A, Article 35A, which you asked me, was a bigger danger than Article 370. The problem with Article 370 was that the local leadership of Kashmir had always used it for the last 70 years as a bargaining tool, as an endless blackmailing tool, and that had to go for that.
Okay, one second. Sir, I think one second, so we'll come back. We'll come back to you.
We will
if I may act as the devil's advocate. Hold on, just I think now the interesting part is coming now. You have to remember this question on Article 370. As someone who's been a practitioner there, let me tell you, the Article 370 was already hollowed out completely. There's no doubt about it, it was hollowed out. But psychologically, there's no doubt that the issue of separatism and the fact that Pakistan could use this idea that there is a thing called Azadi and there's something called merger with Pakistan, that psychologically could always be impinged on the mind of the Kashmiri population. I can tell you this as someone who's remained there many years. Right? The last part, sir, I think I need to respond to your question. First of all, it's a misnomer to say that 1965 territories were handed back because of international pressure. It never happened. It happened primarily because you lost Akhnur. You lost enough territory in Akhnur which had to be exchanged. Otherwise, you had Haji Pir, you would have been sitting with Haji Pir. You had the Pakistani armor sitting at 4 kilometers from the Akhnur bridge. The next war, the next push would have meant the Akhnur bridge would have gone. And the Punch and Rajouri areas would have gone completely from you. So it was pragmatism that we ultimately had to prevail. But the aspect which you raised, whether POK can be regained or not. What is wrong in using what Pakistan is adept at? Psychological warfare. Are you saying I'm going to do it tomorrow or day after tomorrow? I'll do it in the year 2048. Why not put the pressure, the fear of the devil in his mind? So far we have never spoken of POK. What Rajnath Saab said that day was, now the only thing is POK. Let's do it through the psychological route, let's do it through the economic route. There are lots of ways of doing it. Last bouquet of questions. Sir, your question.
Ata, मैं भी हूँ.
I will come to Mr. Kaju just now. One question this side. Bells mean very little sometimes in the army. Just take the... sir, there's a first question. There's a gentleman who had asked for it. You need to.
My submission is that, we have got volumes of analysis of the Kashmir problem written. Lot of studies, including Madam Radha Kumar and all that. But what one reads is more of it describing the issue. Hardly any, concrete solutions. And secondly, once we had reached an agreement between BJP and Congress and it was passed in the parliament that Kashmir is part of India. Thereafter, why there has not been any calibrated approach to
Thank
this
you,
solution?
sir. We got your question. Absolutely right. Mr. Kaju, then we'll come back to you, sir.
Ata, thank you. And please permit me a few minutes. Like you've dealt with Pakistan as a military man, I've had some years as a professional diplomat.
Mr. Kaju was the joint secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs dealing with Pakistan.
First of all, Article 370. Article 370 was only a mechanism of giving autonomy to Kashmir. Kashmir was the only state of the Union which had autonomy. Now, it was always the Sangh Parivar's position that this autonomy is wrong. They made it was not hidden, it was part of their political and constitutional agenda. Right from the beginning. It has been part of their manifestos. So therefore, they have, when there was a political opportunity and the country accepted it, implemented that agenda. So there is nothing so strange about this, and this is a matter for the courts to decide. It is in the courts, and the Supreme Court will have to take a view which everyone will have to accept, that's part of the constitution, on the means and the mechanism through which autonomy is being done away with. That's point one.
Maybe we can...
Second, just one more point. Second, which is a question. The first was an observation. Thank you for permitting it. Whatever we may do in the state of J&K, till we tackle Pakistan, till the contaminant from Pakistan is ended, can we restore Kashmir to health, whatever constitutional status you may provide the state. On that, I would like the panel's view and especially your view, Radha, as a military person. Thank you.
Can we have some questions?
Sir, under Constitution of India, Schedule 1, it's clearly given what are the territories of India. And under the head Kashmir, it was given the whole part of Indian Kashmir as it was there on 26th of January 1950, on the date when the Constitution was enforced. There is no moral or legal authority to change that position later on. And now to claim that whole Pakistan occupied Kashmir or the Azad Kashmir, whatever it is, that is also ours. Tomorrow we say the whole Pakistan is ours. There's no legal or moral authority.
You got the question, sir? We'll have Mr. Iyer, yes. And I request you to be very brief, sir. Just give it to Mr. Iyer. The question is passed to him now. Yeah. So 30 seconds for a comment and 30 seconds for a question.
No, I only have a question. Okay. My question. You have claimed repeatedly today that 370 has been hollowed out. But the longest amendment ever made to the Constitution, that was done in 1992, has still not been accepted by the J&K Assembly and therefore does not apply to J&K, and that is the Panchayati Raj system. Now the first act after 370 that the BJP government is undertaking is not to impose our form of Panchayati Raj on Kashmir, but to use the Kashmiri system of Panchayati Raj to hold elections to the BDC, the Block Development Committees, which is not in the Indian Constitution, which was not in Gandhiji's conception, and which consists of sarpanchas who've been elected by the total of 2 votes cast in an election, determining who will be the BDC to carry out their development program. Would Mr. Sinha please explain this contradiction?
We'll give you the first call on this.
Well, I'm not aware of the technicalities which has gone into it. What I can tell you is that over a period of time, Kashmir will have a new leadership which will make all the effective changes, which will make all the effective changes commensurate with the ideology we believe in. At present, I am not, like I mentioned, I'm not aware of the technicalities which have gone into these particular elections. Sure, I always owe a debt of gratitude to you. The party owes a debt of gratitude to you.
Radha, your response.
Vivek, just one response to your observation. I think you're missing out the agenda of alliance that the BJP and the PDP signed together, in which they said that they would not tinker with the status of the state or with its relationship to the Indian Union. That was 6 years ago. Of course, that agenda then fell to bits immediately afterwards. It's not a question, it's an observation. Now, your other question, which is for Atta, but which I insist on answering as well, is that it's the question of how do you tackle Pakistan. Nobody will deny that Pakistan has to be tackled in one way or another. And nobody will deny that, or at least I won't deny, that the non-state actors that are supported, trained, indoctrinated, and most of them are actually sent here under the influence of drugs as well, that has to end. I think that one of the most successful things that the Indian government did to try to get the pressure to stop that is the Financial Action Task Force, under which we are making gains. By the way, that idea was suggested at one of our Afghanistan roundtables by Ambassador Arundhati Ghosh, and it was then taken up by the Indian government, and I must say it's wonderful to see the progress over the past 8 or 9 years that has been made on that one. Similarly, I believe that the best way to insulate, if you like, people in the valley against some of the ideologies coming from Pakistan has been to make peace with them and to have them on our side. I mean, you surely will remember that both in 48, 49 and 1965, the people of the valley fought alongside Indian troops to repel Pakistani invaders. We need to draw those lessons out as well from our history.
Okay, I think we have to honor the bell at some stage of this whole proceedings. But therefore, my response to Mr. Kaju is, Mr. Kaju here, you must hear me out. This whole thing happening with Pakistan, first of all, is not a unidimensional thing. It's not military to military, and Kaju Sahab understands it. I think we all need to understand it. It's not a military war which is taking place. It is a hybrid situation, which means there are different domains of the spectrum of conflict which are involved in this. FATF is one of the issues, financial aspects are part, the waters is a part of it, terrorism is a part of it. I think the Indian Armed Forces have the capability. I, as a member of the Indian Armed Forces, I consider myself still a member of the Indian Armed Forces. I still have the confidence in my armed forces that if required, we can deliver the situation as far as Pakistan occupied Kashmir is concerned. But do we need to do that? Is war the solution to this? Ultimately, it is your brain which is going to do it. You have to go find different ways of pressurizing Pakistan as the way that you have done it in the last 2 months. You have scored fairly good brownie points, but are not good enough. The entire international media is still against us. What have we done with them? We need to think this through, and we need to look at different domains, the economic domain, the psychological domain, the political domain, every domain to fight this war against Pakistan. Please stop imagining that the military is the only solution for you. When it comes to an emergency, I can tell you one thing, the Indian Armed Forces will always be there. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.